Let's travel back in time for a second, to September 22nd, 1866. Picture the scene, okay? We're at the incredibly dramatic Battle of Curupayty, deep in the wetlands of South America. Now there's an Allied army advancing toward Paraguayan trenches. They've got the numbers, they've got massive firepower, and honestly, they are walking in with the absolute certainty of a quick, decisive victory. But what actually unfolds over the next few hours? Well, it's so staggering, so strategically profound that we literally have to look across centuries and continents to really understand how it happened. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to decode an absolute masterpiece of warfare by looking at it through the lens of ancient military philosophy. It's a wild journey into how ancient strategy still dictates timeless human problem-solving, even right in the middle of the chaos of the 19th century.
Just look at this completely impossible math. The Allied forces marched in with 9,000 men and heavy naval artillery. And just 2 hours later, they had suffered over 4,000 casualties. Think about that for a second. And the Paraguayan defenders, led by General José Eduvigis Diaz, they took fewer than 100 casualties. I mean, no way, right? Okay, we really need to dive into this because this astonishing outcome wasn't magic, it definitely wasn't blind luck. It was, as we'll see, the flawless execution of ancient military strategy playing out in real time.
Here's the roadmap for our explainer today. We're going to start with the broad art of deception, and then we'll drill down into 3 specific tactical principles: Shi, which is positional advantage, death ground terrain, and tactical invisibility. Finally, we'll wrap up by asking the big question: was this Diaz's genius or just a massive Allied failure?
Okay, let's jump right into Section 1, the art of deception, winning before fighting.
To understand the absolute genius of Curupayty, we first need to introduce a guy who lived roughly 2,500 years earlier in ancient China, the legendary general Sun Tzu. He wrote a text consisting of just 13 chapters in under 10,000 original characters. Yet the art of war remains arguably the most influential military treatise in human history. Modern generals literally still study it today. But what's really fascinating here is his radical core premise. He argues that the absolute best general is not the one who wins the most bloody battles. Nope. The best general is the one who wins without fighting at all, or ensures the victory is mathematically guaranteed before the first sword is even drawn or shot is fired. And here is the crazy paradox we're exploring today. General Diaz, born in Paraguay in 1833, almost certainly never read a single line of Sun Tzu's book. Yet somehow, he applied its most complex principles with absolute, pinpoint perfection.
Moving right along to Section 2, Positional Advantage, Releasing Strategic Energy.
Now, in military philosophy, the concept of Shi doesn't really have a perfect English translation, but we can kind of think of it as positional advantage, or the accumulation and precise release of strategic energy. It's exactly like water breaking through a massive dam. Sun Tzu famously summarized this philosophy by saying, "The victorious warrior first wins and then goes to war, while the defeated warrior first goes to war and then seeks to win." So the absolutely crucial takeaway here is that if you show up to the battlefield without having already built your advantage, well, you've already lost. The actual battle is just the violent confirmation of your setup.
And honestly, this brilliantly illustrates how General Diaz completely embodied Qi at Curupayty. Months in advance, literally months, he ordered the construction of nearly 2 kilometers of trenches right along the riverbank. And these weren't just simple hiding spots. Oh no, they were meticulously designed to create deadly, overlapping fields of crossfire. Every single inch of ground in front of them was covered by at least 2 lines of fire. By doing this, he essentially stored up a massive amount of strategic energy. So, when the Allies finally advanced, they weren't just attacking a standard defensive line. They were walking straight into a pre-built trap, releasing all that pent-up energy right onto themselves. Like Sun Tzu said, the battle was won before the very first cannon fired. Which brings us to Section 3, Death Ground Terrain, the power of no escape.
Sun Tzu actually categorized terrain into 9 different types based on their strategic value. But the most extreme, and paradoxically the most powerful, is what he called death ground. And it is exactly what it sounds like, a space where there is absolutely no escape possible. Sun Tzu argued that an army trapped on death ground, assuming they have strong leadership of course, will fight with an unmatched, totally desperate intensity. Why? Because fleeing or surrendering just means dying anyway. It literally turns human survival instinct into a weapon that is way more powerful than any cannon.
And you know what? Diaz understood this instinctively. Notice the incredibly stark contrast between the two forces here. Paraguay was already hostile territory for the Allies, right? But Diaz deliberately inverted the whole dynamic at Curupayty.
He built his trenches with the Paraguay River directly at his own soldiers' backs. There was zero retreat for the defenders. Every single Paraguayan soldier knew the only way out was to hold the line, and that bonded them together into an unbreakable unit. Meanwhile, the massively larger Allied force, they were advancing through completely open, exposed terrain, literally sinking into the mud under devastating crossfire. The terrain completely neutralized the Allies' superior numbers while turning those trapped defenders into an immovable force. Just brilliant.
All right, on to Section 4, Tactical Invisibility, Hiding Your Intentions. According to military scholars, this is often the most difficult principle to actually apply out there in the field, but it is absolutely the most devastating when executed correctly. The art of formlessness, or tactical invisibility. Sun Tzu captured this in a really poetic maxim. He said, "Be as mysterious as the clouds, be as silent as the shadow." Now, obviously, this isn't literal invisibility, right? It's about completely concealing your true strength, hiding your preparations, and keeping your intentions totally masked from the enemy until it is way, way too late for them to adapt.
So how in the world did Diaz achieve this level of deception? Well, for weeks, he kept his preparations completely hidden from Allied intelligence. He used the super-dense Paraguayan vegetation as this giant, natural shield, and he moved his men and materials exclusively under the cover of dark, tropical nights. I mean, not a single shovel stroke gave away their true position. So when the Allies finally arrived, they saw exactly what Diaz wanted them to see, a front line that looked deceptively weak and highly beatable. By remaining entirely formless until the absolute last possible second, Allied intelligence drastically underestimated the depth of those trenches and the sheer number of defenders. They ended up attacking with total confidence, but that confidence was built entirely on false information, a complete illusion.
And that leads us right into Section 5, Genius or Allied Failure, the Final Verdict.
This brings us to a really crucial historical crossroads. Every serious military historian looking at Curupayty really has to ask, did Diaz win through sheer, unmatched tactical mastery, or did the Allies simply defeat themselves through a series of catastrophic blunders? Well, let's weigh the evidence. Look, it's absolutely true that the Allies made monumental mistakes. Their prior naval bombardment, totally ineffective. I mean, the bombs mostly just sank harmlessly into the mud without putting a scratch on the hidden trenches. They had terrible coordination, genuinely poor reconnaissance, and they marched right out into the wide open. But do Allied errors explain the victory entirely? Definitely not. Someone had to meticulously choose that terrain. Someone had to orchestrate the secret trench building under the cover of night. Someone had to maintain unbreakable discipline for weeks on end. The Allies blundered, for sure. But Diaz's true genius lay in spending months preparing to perfectly exploit those exact mistakes. You see, Sun Tzu's principles don't rely on specific technology or even specific geography. They rely entirely on the philosophical sharpness of the commander applying them. Diaz proved that raw, sharp military instinct can perfectly mirror centuries of systematized philosophical thought. Curupayty was just a masterclass in shi, death ground, and invisibility. It was ultimately the art of war made of mud, blood, and silence. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a final, provocative thought to debate. We've seen exactly how perfectly Diaz utilized his chosen environment. But let's change the variables for a second. I want to know your thoughts on this. Who wins in an open field? Diaz, relying on his raw, brilliant instinct, or a general formally trained in Sun Tzu's doctrines? Does instinct beat doctrine when the terrain offers no obvious advantage? Drop your thoughts, and let's keep analyzing the fascinating intersection of philosophy and history. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll see you next time.